On the rugged coast of Maine, where waves crashed against jagged rocks and gulls circled endlessly in the sky, there stood an old lighthouse. Its white paint was weathered, and the red roof had faded under decades of sun and storms. Near that lighthouse lived Margaret Sinclair, a 90-year-old woman with hair as white as the sea foam and eyes that reflected the endless horizon. Every morning, Margaret walked the rocky path to the lighthouse and stood by the edge, staring out at the vast Atlantic Ocean. People in the nearby town often asked why she went there every day. "Does she hope to see someone?" they whispered. And the answer was yes. Many decades earlier, Margaret had fallen in love with a young sailor named Thomas. They had spent summers together, walking along the cliffs and dreaming of a life filled with adventure. But one stormy night, Thomas's ship disappeared into the sea, and he was never seen again. Heartbroken, Margaret returned to the lighthouse the next morning, determined to wait. She promised herself that she would watch the sea every day, hoping that somehow, miraculously, Thomas might return. Years turned into decades. Her hair turned silver. Friends and neighbors came and went. Technology changed the world, but Margaret's vigil remained constant. Children who passed by the lighthouse whispered about the old woman who never left. Tourists often stopped to take photos, curious about her determination. But Margaret barely noticed them. Her eyes were always fixed on the horizon. One summer evening, a young Coast Guard named Daniel approached her. He had seen Margaret many times during his patrols and was curious. "Ma'am," he said politely, "do you really think he'll come back?" Margaret smiled faintly. "I don't know," she admitted, "but hope is worth the wait. And waiting keeps me alive, keeps my heart full." Daniel nodded, unsure if he understood. One stormy night, similar to the one decades ago, Daniel found Margaret huddled against the lighthouse door, shivering in the wind. He guided her inside to warm her by the fire. "Why do you stay out there in storms like this?" Daniel asked. Margaret looked out at the churning sea. "Because love is patient," she said softly. "It doesn't demand answers. It doesn't measure time. It waits and it hopes." Years passed, and Margaret continued her vigil. She became a symbol for the town. Not for superstition or mystery, but for devotion, resilience, and the power of hope. One morning, as the sun rose over the Atlantic, Margaret spotted a small sailboat returning to the harbor. It wasn't Thomas. He was gone forever, but it carried travelers who had been inspired by her story. They waved to her from the deck, smiling and calling her name. Margaret realized something profound. The world changes, people move on, and some dreams never return, but the act of waiting, loving, and hoping leaves an imprint far beyond any single moment. From that day on, Margaret continued her daily walks to the lighthouse. She watched the waves, she smiled at the horizon, and she reminded the town that some hearts are courageous enough to wait a lifetime, not for what is certain, but for what is meaningful. And as the lighthouse beams swept across the dark waters at night, it carried her silent message to all. Hope, patience, and love are the strongest lights of all.